This is an audio production of the book Dementia, Understanding, Caring, Enduring by J.R.R. Lewis. Introduction. Dementia is not a single moment. It does not arrive all at once, and it does not unfold in a straight line. It comes gradually, often quietly at first, and then with increasing clarity until it can no longer be ignored. This book exists to help make sense of that path, not to solve it, not to simplify it, but to make it clearer. There is no shortage of information about dementia. Medical explanations, treatment options, and research continue to grow. But understanding the condition is not the same as understanding the experience. What this book seeks to do is different. It brings together what has been observed, lived, and expressed by many caregivers, families, and individuals facing this reality from within. It takes what is often scattered across conversations, forums, and clinical descriptions and places it into a form that can be followed. This is not written from a single story. It is drawn from patterns that repeat across many stories. If you are walking through this now, you may recognize what is written here. If you are approaching it, you may begin to understand what lies ahead. If you have already walked through it, you may find language for things that were difficult to describe at the time. This book is for those who are caring for someone with dementia, for those who are trying to understand what is happening, for those who are carrying the weight of decisions, uncertainty, and change. It is also for those who simply want to see more clearly what this condition does, not only to the mind, but to relationships, to identity, and to those who remain alongside it. The goal is not to overwhelm, but to orient, not to provide every answer, but to help you recognize what you are facing. There will be moments in these pages that feel familiar. There may be moments that feel difficult. Both are part of the same reality. What dementia takes is real. What it leaves behind is also real. Understanding both matters. This is not a book about fixing what cannot be fixed. To everything there is a season. Ecclesiastes 3:1. It is a book about seeing clearly, caring well, and enduring what unfolds. And if along the way something here helps you feel less alone or better able to understand what you are walking through, then it has served its purpose. Part 1. The intruder arrives. Recognition. Something is wrong. Chapter 1. The first uneasy moments. It does not begin with something obvious. No announcement, no clear line crossed. Just small things. A question asked twice, then again. You answer it the same way and tell yourself it's nothing. A word is lost mid-sentence. They pause, laugh it off. You laugh too, but something lingers. They forget a name they should know. Not distant, close. You feel it but say nothing. Keys misplaced, appointments missed, stories repeated, all explainable, all dismissible. You begin to notice patterns, but you don't call them that. Not yet. There is a quiet instinct in you, something not fully formed, that says this is different. But you push it away, because to name it is to begin something you cannot stop. It is easier to explain it than to face it. The prudent sees danger and hides himself. Proverbs 22:3. Days pass, then weeks. Nothing dramatic, just accumulation. They tell the same story with the same details as if it were the first time. You nod again. You begin to adjust without realizing it, finishing sentences, filling in gaps, quietly compensating. A look crosses their face, brief, uncertain, like they've stepped into a room and forgotten why. You see it, and this time you cannot unsee it. Still, you hesitate. Because once spoken, it becomes real in a way it was not before. So you wait. You observe. You collect moments. You begin to carry a question you do not want answered.
Something is happening, but you do not yet know what. For now we see in a mirror dimly. 1 Corinthians 13:12. Others may not notice, or if they do, they dismiss it. Normal aging, just getting older. You want to believe that. You try to believe that. But you are closer. You see more. And what you are seeing does not feel like aging. It feels like something slowly coming undone. Not breaking, not yet, just loosening. Threads you didn't know were threads begin to slip. And with each small moment, something inside you tightens. Not panic, not yet, but awareness. The beginning is not loud. It is quiet enough to ignore until it isn't. Be sober-minded, be watchful. 1 Peter 5:8. You will look back on this time later. You will trace the signs and connect the moments, and you will wonder how long it had really been there. But for now, you stand at the edge of something unnamed, and you are not ready to step into it. Chapter 2. Naming the thing. At some point, the question can no longer be held quietly. It begins to press outward. What was once suspicion becomes something that needs a name. You start to say it, but not all at once. Something's off. I don't know. They've changed. You test the words before you commit to them. Others may still hesitate or dismiss it, but you are past that now, because you have seen too much. There is a moment, not always dramatic, when concern becomes pursuit. Appointments are made. Questions are written down. You begin to gather evidence, not to prove something wrong, but because you already know something is. Waiting becomes its own burden. You sit in rooms where time slows down, listening for answers you are not sure you want. Tests are given. Words are used that feel clinical and distant. But the weight of them is not distant at all. You begin to understand this is not a passing phase. Still, there is a gap between knowing and naming, and crossing that gap costs something. Because once it is named, it cannot be unnamed. A diagnosis does not begin the problem. It reveals it. For nothing is hidden that will be made manifest. Luke 8:17. The word comes. Dementia. It may be spoken gently, carefully, or with more certainty than you are ready for. But once spoken, it settles into the room. It changes the air. You hear it, but you also feel it. Everything before this moment begins to rearrange itself. You look backward and see what you missed. Moments that once seemed small now feel like signals, and you begin to ask questions that cannot be answered. How long? Why didn't we see it sooner? Could this have been stopped? Knowing brings clarity, but it also brings weight. For in much wisdom is much grief. Ecclesiastes 1:18. Some feel relief, not because it is good, but because it is known. Uncertainty narrows even if the road ahead does not. Others feel only fear, because now there is direction to the loss. You begin to understand this is not something that turns around. It moves forward, slowly, unevenly, but forward. You leave with information, pamphlets, next steps, but none of it feels equal to what has just been said, because what you have received is not just a diagnosis. It is a future you did not choose. And now, you must learn how to walk into it. Chapter 3. It was already there. The diagnosis feels like a beginning, but it isn't. It is a moment of discovery, not a moment of origin. Long before the first question, before the missed names, before the quiet unease, something had already begun. Hidden. Changes were forming where no one could see them. Years before symptoms, the brain was already shifting. Slowly, silently. Nothing in daily life gave it away. Conversations were normal, routines unchanged. Life moved forward as if nothing were wrong. And yet, something was. You did not miss it. You could not have seen it. That truth is hard to hold, because now, looking back, everything feels like it should have been obvious. Small moments rearrange themselves. Things once dismissed now feel significant. You revisit conversations, decisions. You replay them with new understanding, and with that comes a question that settles in quietly. Could this have been stopped?
Hindsight creates clarity that was never available in the moment. The secret things belong to the Lord our God. Deuteronomy 29:29. There are things we only see once they are revealed, and once seen, they cannot be unseen. You begin to learn that dementia does not start when it is diagnosed. It has been unfolding for years. 10, sometimes 20, long before anyone would have thought to look. This realization brings weight, because it reaches backward into years you thought were certain. It unsettles what felt secure. But it also brings something else. Release. You are not responsible for what could not be known. You are not accountable for what could not be seen. Not everything hidden is ours to uncover. You do not know what tomorrow will bring. James 4:14. There will be voices that say otherwise, things you should have noticed, steps you should have taken. But those voices speak from the illusion of hindsight, not from the reality you were living in. At the time, you were simply living, responding to what you saw, trusting what was in front of you. That is all anyone does. Now you stand with a different understanding, looking backward with clarity and forward with uncertainty. But the past is no longer yours to change, only to see rightly and to release what was never yours to carry. Part 2. The Slow Unraveling. What dementia actually does. Chapter 4. Memory begins to slip. It does not disappear all at once. It loosens. At first, it is small things, names misplaced, details forgotten, conversations that seem to fade too quickly. You notice repetition, a question asked again, then again, each time with the same tone, as if it were new. You answer gently, then patiently, then at times with effort. They are not aware it has already been asked. To them, it is the first time. Something that once held firm, memory, continuity, sequence, begins to fragment. Moments no longer connect the way they used to. What just happened slips away, while something from years ago remains clear. The present becomes harder to hold. The past becomes easier to reach. You begin to live in a strange imbalance, where yesterday is lost, but decades ago feel close. You try to remind them. You fill in gaps. You repeat yourself. Sometimes it works. Often it does not. You begin to realize that memory is not simply missing, it is unreliable. It comes and goes, holds and slips, appears steady then vanishes. You cannot depend on it the way you once did.
This changes everything. Conversations shift. Plans become uncertain. Even simple exchanges require more patience, more awareness. You begin to measure time differently, not in days or weeks, but in moments that hold and moments that do not. There are flashes when everything seems clear, a name remembered, a story told correctly. You feel relief. Maybe it isn't as bad as you thought, but the pattern does not hold. The clarity fades again, and you begin to understand this is not inconsistency. This is progression. Memory is not simply fading. It is losing its place. My heart throbs, my strength fails me, and the light of my eyes, it also has gone from me. Psalm 38:10. You adjust without realizing it. You repeat yourself more often. You simplify what you say. You begin to anticipate what will be forgotten. You carry more of the remembering. At times, frustration rises, not at them, but at the situation, at the repetition, at the slow erosion of what once felt stable. And then comes the quiet realization. They are not choosing this. They are not forgetting on purpose. What is slipping away is not under their control. You are remembering for both of you now. Bear one another's burdens. Galatians 6:2. This is where the shift begins, from expecting to adapting, from correcting to carrying, from assuming memory to living without it. It is not a dramatic change, it is gradual, but it is unmistakable. And once you see it, you begin to understand that what is slipping will not return.
Chapter 5. Time breaks apart. At first, it seems like simple confusion, dates mixed up, days misplaced, an appointment remembered for the wrong time. Easy to explain, easy to correct. But over time, it becomes something more than confusion. Time itself begins to loosen its hold. They speak of people long gone as if they are still living. They refer to places they have not been in years as if they were there yesterday. You try to gently correct them. You remind them what year it is, what has happened, who is no longer here. But the correction does not settle. It does not stay. It only creates tension. Because to them, what they are saying is not memory. It is reality. The past is no longer something behind them. It has moved forward and taken the place of the present. You begin to realize they are not remembering incorrectly. They are living somewhere else entirely. Two timelines now exist. One you share, one you do not. You continue to move forward through days and calendars, while they move freely through decades that feel just as immediate. At times, the overlap is disorienting. They may recognize you but place you in the wrong season of life. A child becomes a sibling. A spouse becomes a stranger, then familiar again. It is not just forgetting, it is misplacing time. And when time is misplaced, everything connected to it shifts as well. Relationships, roles, expectations. You begin to understand that orientation is not just about knowing the date. It is about knowing where you are in the story. And that sense of place is beginning to slip. When time breaks apart, reality no longer holds together the way it once did. 1,000 years in your sight are but as yesterday when it is past. Psalm 94. You try, at first, to bring them back, to anchor them in the present, to remind them where they are. But you begin to see that pulling them forward only creates confusion and distress, because the place they are in feels real, more real at times than the one you are trying to offer. So a question begins to form, one that changes everything. Do I keep correcting?
or do I begin to meet them where they are? That question does not come easily. It goes against instinct, against habit, against everything you have relied on before. But slowly, you begin to see, being right is no longer the goal. Connection is. You may not share the same timeline anymore, but you can still share the same moment, and that becomes enough. You cannot always bring them back to your time, but you can step into theirs. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. Philippians 2:4. This is where something shifts again, not in them, but in you. You stop trying to restore what was and begin learning how to live within what is. And in that shift, difficult as it is, a new kind of understanding begins to take shape. Chapter 6. Personality Shifts. At first, it is subtle. Small changes in tone, reactions that feel slightly off, responses that don't quite match the moment. Easy to overlook, easy to excuse. But over time, the shifts become harder to ignore. The person you have known begins to respond in ways that feel unfamiliar, not entirely different, but no longer fully the same. They may become more withdrawn, less engaged, quieter than before, or the opposite, more reactive, more emotional, more easily unsettled. What was once steady begins to fluctuate. You try to make sense of it. Stress, aging, circumstances, there are always explanations available. But the pattern does not resolve. It continues. Moments arise where you think, that's not like them. And then those moments begin to repeat. It is not just behavior changing, it is expression, tone, presence. The way they carry themselves in the world begins to shift. This is where it becomes harder to name. Memory loss can be seen, time confusion can be explained, but personality feels deeper. Because personality is what we often use to recognize someone. And when that begins to change, something unsettles at a deeper level.
It is not just what they forget. It is how they are becoming different. All flesh is like grass. The grass withers, and the flower falls. 1 Peter 1:24. You may find yourself reacting internally before you understand why. A comment that feels sharp. A response that feels out of place. A tone that was never there before. And then the realization comes. This is not intentional. The changes are not chosen. They are emerging from something happening beneath the surface. Still, the impact is real. It can feel like loss even before anything is fully gone. You may begin to grieve quietly, not because they are absent, but because something familiar is fading. And yet there are moments when they feel like themselves again. A tone, a gesture, a brief return. Those moments can be comforting, but they can also be confusing, because they remind you of what is changing. This is not a clean shift. It is uneven. One moment familiar, the next not. And you begin to live in that tension, recognizing and not recognizing at the same time. They are still themselves, and yet they are not as they were. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. Hebrews 13:8. That contrast becomes quietly important, because everything else feels like it is moving, shifting, becoming uncertain. And in the middle of that, you begin to realize that what you are experiencing is not just change. It is transformation you did not expect and cannot control. So you begin to adjust again. Less expectation, more observation, less assumption, more patience. Not because it is easy, but because it is necessary. And slowly,
You begin to learn how to hold both realities at once, who they have been and who they are becoming. Chapter 7. When the filters fail. At first, it catches you off guard. A comment that feels out of place, sharper than expected, or strangely inappropriate. You pause, unsure if you heard it correctly. You may laugh it off, redirect, move past it quickly. But then it happens again. Something that once would have been held back is now spoken freely. Thoughts that would have remained private are now expressed without hesitation. It is not just unusual. It can be uncomfortable. At times, embarrassing. At times, even hurtful. You begin to notice that restraint is slipping. The internal filter that once shaped what was said and what was left unsaid is no longer functioning the same way. They may say things that do not reflect who they have been, words that feel out of character, reactions that seem disconnected from the moment. And this creates a new kind of tension, not just confusion, but exposure. Because what is spoken now may not align with what you know to be true of them. The filter is failing, but the words still land. Set a guard, O Lord, over my mouth. Keep watch over the door of my lips. Psalm 141:3. You may feel the urge to correct, to apologize on their behalf, to explain to others what is happening. Sometimes you do. Sometimes you simply absorb it and move on. But inside, something shifts. Because this is no longer just about memory or confusion. It is about how they are seen, and how you carry that with them. There are moments when past patterns resurface, old habits, old language, things long buried returning without warning. It can feel like a step backward in time, but without the awareness that once kept those things in check. This is not a return to who they were. It is a release of what was once contained. And that distinction matters, because what you are seeing is not a truer version of them, it is a less filtered one. Dementia does not create new character. It removes the boundaries that once shaped it. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Matthew 12:34. That truth can be difficult to hold, not because it condemns, but because it complicates. You begin to understand that what is happening is neurological, not intentional. The brain's ability to regulate, to inhibit, to choose what is appropriate, this is what is being affected. And yet the impact remains real. So again, you adjust, not by excusing everything, but by understanding what is driving it. You learn when to redirect, when to step in, and when to simply let the moment pass. Not every word can be corrected. Not every situation can be controlled. But the way you respond begins to matter more than the words themselves. And in that, another quiet shift takes place, away from managing appearances and toward protecting dignity in the middle of what cannot be fully managed.
Part 3. Two worlds emerge. Reality is no longer shared. Chapter 8. Their world is real. At first, you assume it is confusion, a mistake that can be corrected. They say something untrue, you gently offer the right version. You expect it to settle things. But it doesn't. Because what they are saying is not an error to them. It is reality. They are not guessing. They are not imagining. They are responding to a world that feels fully real. You begin to notice that correction does not bring clarity. It brings agitation. The more you insist, the more unsettled they become. Because you are not just correcting a fact. You are contradicting their reality. And to them, you are the one who is wrong. This is where something shifts. Not in them, but in your understanding. You begin to see that two realities now exist, one grounded in shared facts,
one shaped by what their mind can still hold. And these realities do not easily meet. Their world is not accurate, but it is real to them. There is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way to death. Proverbs 14:12. At first, you try to hold your ground, to stay anchored in what is true, but truth, as you have known it, is no longer the bridge between you. It becomes a barrier. Every correction creates distance. Every insistence widens the gap. So a new question begins to form, one that feels uncomfortable at first. Do I keep correcting, or do I begin to enter their world? This is not surrendering truth, it is choosing connection. You begin to respond differently, not arguing the facts, but acknowledging the feeling behind them. If they are afraid, you respond to fear. If they are searching, you respond to the need to find. The details may be wrong, the emotion is not, and it is the emotion that now matters most. You are no longer called to correct their world, but to meet them within it. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. Philippians 2:4. This does not come naturally. It requires letting go of something, control, certainty, the need to be right. But in that letting go, something else becomes possible. Peace in moments that would have once been filled with tension. Connection where there would have been conflict. You may not share the same reality anymore, but you can still share presence. And in the end, presence becomes more valuable than accuracy. Chapter 9. The F of Being Right. It feels natural to correct, to guide back to what is true. You hear something inaccurate and respond instinctively. No, that's not what happened. That person isn't here anymore. You already asked me that. You expect the correction to help, to settle things, but it rarely does. Instead, it creates friction. Confusion deepens. Frustration rises, sometimes in them, sometimes in you, often in both. Because what you are offering as clarity is not received that way. It feels to them like contradiction. And contradiction does not bring peace. It brings resistance. You begin to notice a pattern. The more you try to fix the moment, the more the moment unravels. Conversations loop, tension builds, nothing resolves. And slowly, a realization begins to take shape. Being right is no longer the goal, because being right does not restore what has been lost. It does not anchor them. It does not calm them. It does not reconnect you. It only reminds both of you that something is no longer working the way it once did. Accuracy does not equal connection. Knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. 1 Corinthians 8:1. This is difficult to accept, because for most of life, truth and correction have been tools for helping, guiding, protecting. Now, those same tools can create distance. So you begin to ask a different question. Not, is this correct, but what will help in this moment? And the answer is often not correction. It is presence. It is tone. It is choosing not to challenge what does not need to be challenged. This does not mean abandoning truth. It means understanding where truth can no longer function in the same way. There are moments when correction still matters, safety, direction, immediate harm. But most moments are not those. Most moments are relational. And in those moments, insistence on being right can cost more than it gives.
You can win the argument and still lose the connection. A gentle answer turns away wrath. Proverbs 15:1. So you begin to let some things go. Not because they are untrue, but because correcting them no longer serves what matters most. You learn to redirect instead of confront, to affirm emotion instead of challenge detail. It feels unnatural at first, even wrong, but over time you begin to see the difference: less agitation, more calm, fewer conflicts, more moments that hold together. And you begin to understand this is not about surrendering truth. It is about choosing love in a situation where truth, as you once used it, no longer carries the same weight. Being right once helped you care for them. Now, letting go of being right may be what allows you to keep caring at all. Chapter 10. Entering their world. At some point, you realize correction is not working, not because truth has changed, but because it no longer connects. You can continue to pull them toward your reality, but it creates confusion, not clarity. So something shifts. You begin, slowly, to move toward theirs. This does not come naturally. It feels like letting go of something important, because for most of life, understanding meant agreement, shared facts, common ground. Now that ground is gone. They may be searching for someone who is no longer alive, preparing for an event long past, or speaking as if they are in a different time entirely. And instead of correcting, you begin to respond differently, not to the details, but to the need behind them. If they are searching, you help them feel found. If they are afraid, you bring calm. The facts may not align. The emotion always does. You stop trying to fix their reality and begin responding to their experience. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Romans 12:15. This is not pretending. It is not agreeing with what is untrue. It is choosing connection over correction. You meet them where they are, not because it is accurate, but because it is accessible. And in doing so, something changes. Tension eases. Moments last longer. The need to argue fades. You are no longer working against them. You are with them. Love adapts when understanding no longer can. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. Philippians 2:4. This becomes a new way of being, not guiding from a distance, but entering fully into the moment they are living in. And in that, something unexpected happens. Even without shared reality, connection remains. Part 4. The Hidden Grief. The Caregiver's Burden. Chapter 11. Here, but not here. They are still present, sitting in the same chair, walking the same rooms, speaking in the same voice, and yet something is different in a way that is hard to name. You can see them, hear them, even touch them, but the connection you once relied on does not fully meet you anymore. At times they seem close, engaged, aware, familiar, and then just as quickly, distant again. It is not a clean loss, not sudden, not complete. It is partial, shifting, uneven. You begin to feel something you cannot easily explain. Grief, but not the kind that follows death, because they are still here, and yet not fully. Presence remains, but access changes. Hope deferred makes the heart sick. Proverbs 13:12. You may find yourself reaching for them in conversation, in memory, in shared understanding, and coming up short, not because they are unwilling, but because something in the connection no longer holds the same way. This creates a tension that is difficult to live with. You cannot grieve fully because they are not gone.
You cannot relax into normalcy because things are no longer the same. So you exist in between, holding both realities at once. They are here, and they are slipping. You may begin to miss them while sitting right beside them. That is a strange kind of loss, one that does not resolve, one that repeats itself day after day in small ways that accumulate.
You are not grieving the end. You are grieving the change. Even though I walk through the valley. Psalm 23:4. Others may not understand this. They may see only that the person is still alive, but you feel what is different. You live with it. And over time, you begin to adjust, not by denying the loss, but by learning how to live within it. You stop expecting what can no longer be given. You begin to receive what still remains, not as it was, but as it is. And in that shift, quiet as it may be, something steady begins to form, not resolution, but endurance. Chapter 12. Grieving the Living. Grief usually follows loss. It comes after when something has ended. But here, it comes before, and during, and without resolution. They are still alive, still present, and yet you begin to grieve. Not all at once, but in pieces. A conversation that no longer connects. A memory no longer shared. A part of them you realize is no longer accessible. Each moment small. Together, heavy. This is not the grief of finality. It is the grief of change that does not stop. You are mourning someone who is still here. My tears have been my food day and night. Psalm 42:3. There is no clear moment to mark it, no gathering, no closure, just an ongoing awareness that something is slipping away. And with that, a quiet sorrow that does not fully surface, but does not leave. You may not speak of it, you may not even name it, but you feel it. In the pauses, in the differences, in the moments that used to be easy and are no longer. It can feel confusing, even wrong, because how do you grieve someone you are still caring for, still speaking to, still seeing every day? So you carry it quietly, not because it is small, but because it is hard to explain. Others may not see it. They may not understand why you feel what you feel. But this grief is real, and it accumulates, not in one moment, but across many. This is not a single loss. It is a series of them. Why are you cast down, O my soul? Psalm 42:5. You may begin to notice it in yourself. Fatigue that is more than physical, heaviness that does not lift with rest. Because grief that does not resolve does not release. It lingers. And yet, you continue. You care. You respond. You stay present. Not because the grief is gone, but because love remains. And in that tension, grief and love side by side, you begin to understand something deeper. This is not about moving on. It is about staying. Chapter 13. The weight no one sees. From the outside, much of this is invisible. People may see moments, brief visits, short interactions, but not the accumulation, not the constant awareness, the adjustments, the quiet strain carried throughout the day. Because this is not a single task. It is ongoing, always watching, always anticipating, always responding. Even in stillness, there is weight. You begin to carry things others do not notice, decisions, concerns, small calculations that never fully stop. What might seem simple to others is no longer simple to you, and over time, that begins to add up.
The burden is not just in what you do, but in what you carry. Let us not grow weary of doing good. Galatians 6:9. There are moments when you feel it more sharply, fatigue that is not solved by rest, weariness that settles deeper than the body. Because this is not just physical, it is emotional, mental, relational. You may find yourself thinking ahead constantly, what might happen, what needs to be managed, what cannot be overlooked. And even when nothing is happening, the possibility of something is always present. That is its own kind of exhaustion. Others may offer help. Some do. Many do not know how. And so much of this becomes yours to hold, not because you chose all of it, but because you are the one who stayed.
What is carried quietly is often the heaviest. The Lord is my strength when I am weak. Isaiah 40:29, paraphrased. You may not speak of it often, not because it is small, but because it is constant. And constant things are hard to describe. They become part of the background even as they shape everything in the foreground. Still, it affects you, in ways others may not see, in ways you may not fully recognize until you are already tired. And yet, you continue, not because it is easy, not because it is light, but because it is yours to carry in this season. And even in that unseen weight, there is something steady forming, not strength that shouts, but strength that endures. Part 5. The world pulls away. Relational fracture. Chapter 14. Friends disappear. At first, people show concern. They ask questions. They offer help. But over time, something changes. The calls become less frequent, the visits shorter. Then, sometimes, they stop altogether. Not always out of neglect, often out of uncertainty. People do not know what to say. They are unsure how to act. They worry about doing the wrong thing. So instead, they begin to step back. It is rarely announced. It just happens, gradually, quietly, until you begin to notice who is no longer there, and the absence is felt. Silence, over time, becomes its own message. A friend loves at all times. Proverbs 17:17. You may try to explain it. Life is busy. People have their own burdens, and those things are true. But the space remains. Moments that once would have been shared are now carried alone. Conversations that might have brought relief no longer happen. You begin to adjust again, not expecting what once felt natural, not reaching out as often, not explaining as much, because it is easier at times to carry it quietly than to feel the absence repeatedly. It is not always rejection, but it still feels like loss. Turn to me and be gracious to me, for I am lonely and afflicted. Psalm 25:16. There may be a few who remain, those who step closer instead of away. Their presence becomes more noticeable, more meaningful, because when many withdraw, those who stay stand out. You begin to see clearly who is willing to enter into difficulty and who is not. That clarity is not always comfortable, but it is real. And over time, you begin to rely less on what was and more on what remains. Not a wide circle, but a smaller, steadier one. And even in the quiet narrowing, something important becomes visible. Presence is not measured by words, but by who stays. Chapter 15. When the church goes quiet. There is an expectation, often unspoken, that the church will be different, that it will step in, draw near, remain present when things become difficult. Sometimes it does, but sometimes it grows quiet.
not out of indifference, but uncertainty. People do not know how to engage. They are unsure what is needed, what to say, how to help without intruding. So instead of moving closer, they hesitate. And hesitation over time becomes absence. Good intentions do not always become presence. If one member suffers, all suffer together. 1 Corinthians 12:26. You may notice it slowly. Fewer visits, fewer conversations, less contact than you expected. Not because people do not care, but because they do not know how to enter into something that feels unfamiliar and uncomfortable. Dementia does not fit neatly into the kinds of care people are used to giving. It is long, uneven, difficult to define. There is no clear moment to respond, no obvious way to resolve it. So some remain on the edge, and those inside the experience feel it, not always as abandonment, but as distance where closeness was hoped for. When presence is uncertain, silence often takes its place. Let us not neglect to meet together, but encourage one another. Hebrews 10:25. There may be individuals who step in, quietly, consistently, without needing direction. Their presence carries weight, but broader support may remain limited, not from lack of faith, but from lack of understanding. And so again, you adjust. You lower expectations. You rely more on what is certain, not because the church should not be present, but because in this moment it is not always able to be. That reality can be difficult to hold, but it also reveals something important. Care is not only about intention, it is about action. And where action is present, even in small ways, it matters more than words. In time, you begin to recognize it more clearly. Those who are willing to enter into suffering and those who remain at a distance from it.
Chapter 16. Why People Withdraw. It is easy to feel the absence, harder to understand it. When people pull back, the first instinct is often to take it personally, to wonder what changed, what was said, what was missed. But most of the time, the reason is simpler. They do not know what to do. Dementia creates situations people have not been taught to navigate. Conversations do not follow familiar patterns. Responses are unpredictable. What once felt natural now feels uncertain, and uncertainty makes people hesitant. They worry about saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing, making things worse instead of better. So instead of stepping in, they hold back. Discomfort often leads to distance. Whoever isolates himself seeks his own desire. Proverbs 18:1. There is also something else, something quieter. Dementia confronts people with decline, with loss, with realities they would rather not face. It reflects something they cannot control, something that may one day touch their own life. And for many, that is difficult to sit with. So they avoid it, not intentionally, not consciously, but consistently. It is easier to stay where things feel normal, easier to remain in conversations that make sense, in relationships that do not require adjustment. And over time, that choice creates distance. Not because care is absent, but because comfort is preferred. Avoidance is often about self-protection, not lack of care. The heart knows its own bitterness. Proverbs 14:10. Understanding this does not remove the impact. The absence is still felt. The space is still real. But it can change how you carry it. Less as rejection, more as limitation. People step back not always because they do not care, but because they do not know how to stay.
And that distinction, while it does not remove the loss, can soften it, because it allows you to see clearly this is not always about you. It is about what others are able or unable to face. Part 6. What remains? The central question of identity. Chapter 17. Are they still themselves? At some point, the question rises, quietly at first, then more directly. Are they still the same person? It is not asked lightly. It comes after changes have been seen, felt, lived with. After memory fades, personality shifts, and familiar patterns begin to loosen. Because what you once used to recognize them is no longer fully reliable. They may forget what they have lived. They may respond in ways that feel unfamiliar. They may seem present in body, but altered in ways that are hard to name. And so the question forms, not out of doubt, but out of disorientation. If so much has changed, what still remains? Then the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Ecclesiastes 12:7. You begin to look more closely, not for what is missing, but for what is still there. A reaction, a tone, a moment of recognition that passes quickly but feels real. Something beneath the surface that has not disappeared, even if it is harder to reach. Because while memory may fade, something deeper continues. They may not recall your name, but they respond to your presence. They may not follow a conversation, but they recognize comfort, familiarity, care. That response matters. It points to something that is not dependent on cognition alone. A person is more than what they can remember. I have called you by name, you are mine. Isaiah 43:1. This does not remove the difficulty. It does not restore what has been lost, but it reframes what you are seeing. You are not watching a person disappear. You are watching access to them change. And that distinction is important, because it shifts the question, not are they still themselves, but how do I reach who they still are? And in that shift, something steadier begins to form. Not certainty, but recognition.
Chapter 18. Glimpses through the fog. There are moments when everything seems to return. Not fully, not permanently, but clearly enough to feel unmistakable. A name spoken correctly, a memory recalled with detail, a look that feels familiar in a way that reaches through everything else. You notice it immediately, because it stands out. Against the confusion, the repetition, the distance, this feels like clarity. And for a moment, it changes everything. You begin to wonder if something is improving, if the decline has paused, if what you feared may not be as certain as it seemed. Hope rises quickly in these moments because they feel like restoration. But they are not reversal. They are glimpses. For now we see in a mirror dimly. 1 Corinthians 13:12. The clarity does not hold. It fades as quietly as it came, and the pattern returns, fragmented memory, uncertain responses, disconnection that feels familiar again. This can be difficult to accept, because the glimpse showed you what is still there, and losing access to it again feels like a second loss. But over time, you begin to understand these moments differently. Not as signs that things are returning, but as reminders that something remains. They reveal depth, not direction.
What appears briefly was never fully gone. It is simply harder to reach. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. John 1:5. These moments matter, not because they change the course, but because they confirm the presence. They remind you that beneath what is fading, something continues, even if only in fragments, even if only for seconds. And you begin to receive them differently, not as something to hold on to, but as something to recognize when it appears. A glimpse, a reminder, a quiet reassurance that what you love is still there, even when you cannot always reach it. Chapter 19. The part that doesn't disappear. So much changes. Memory fades, personality shifts. Words become harder to find. The ways you once recognized them begin to loosen, one by one. And it leads to a deeper question. If all of this can be altered, what remains? At first, it can feel like everything is being taken. The conversations you once had, the shared memories, the ease of understanding. All of it seems to slip, slowly but steadily. But if you stay long enough, if you watch closely enough, something else begins to emerge. Not in the same way, not consistently, but clearly enough that it cannot be dismissed. A response to your presence, a softening when you enter the room, a calm that settles even when words no longer connect. They may not know your name, but they know something about you, not as information, but as recognition. You begin to see that what remains is not held in memory alone. There is something deeper than recall, something not dependent on the mind's ability to organize and retrieve. It shows itself in small ways: a hand that reaches back, a face that relaxes when you sit near, a moment of connection that cannot be explained by what they can remember. There is a part of the person that is not built on cognition. The Lord looks on the heart. 1 Samuel 16:7. This changes how you see them, because what you are witnessing is not just loss, it is exposure. As the outer layers fade, the structured memory, the practiced responses, the learned patterns, something more basic, more essential remains. Not refined, not always clear, but present. This part does not speak in full sentences. It does not organize itself neatly, but it responds to tone, to touch, to presence. And that response matters, because it tells you something fundamental. They are still there, not as they were, but not gone. The disease changes access. It does not erase personhood. I have called you by name. You are mine. Isaiah 43:1. You begin to understand that a person is not defined only by what they can do, or say, or remember. Those things reveal them, but they are not the whole of them. Because even when those are diminished, something continues, a core, a presence. This does not remove the grief. It does not restore what has been lost, but it anchors something. It allows you to remain connected, even when the usual pathways are gone. Not through conversation, but through being, sitting, holding a hand, sharing a moment that does not need to be explained. And in those moments, you begin to see it more clearly. What remains is not dependent on clarity of thought. It is deeper than that.
There is something in a person that cannot be reduced to function. God is spirit. John 4:24. This is not something you prove. It is something you recognize. in the quiet, in the presence, in the connection that persists even when everything else has changed. And once you see it, you begin to understand that what you are holding on to was never as fragile as you feared. Part 7. Love Relearned. How Love Must Change. Chapter 20. When Love Stops Working the Old Way. What once worked no longer does. You try the same approaches, explaining, reminding, reasoning, but they no longer land the way they used to. What once helped now creates confusion. What once resolved things now prolongs them. And this can be frustrating, because you are not doing anything wrong. You are doing what has always worked, but the situation has changed. And love, as you have practiced it, must change with it. You begin to see that effort alone is not enough. You can try harder, explain more clearly, repeat more patiently, and still find that the outcome does not improve. Because the issue is not effort, it is alignment. You are still working from an old framework, one that depended on shared understanding, memory, and reasoning, and those things are no longer stable. Love that depends on what has changed will begin to fail. Love never ends. 1 Corinthians 13:8. This is where the shift begins. Not in how much you love, but in how that love is expressed. You begin to release certain expectations, that they will understand, that they will remember, that things will return to what they were. And in releasing those expectations, something opens. You are no longer trying to restore what has been lost. You are learning how to love within what remains. This is not a lesser form of love. It is a different one, less dependent on response, less dependent on recognition, more rooted in presence. Love becomes less about exchange and more about giving. It is more blessed to give than to receive. Acts 20:35. This can feel one-sided. At times it is. But over time, you begin to see that something is still received, just not in the same way. A calm, a softening, a quiet response that may not be spoken but is real. And that becomes enough. Not because it replaces what was, but because it meets what is. You begin to understand that love is not failing. It is being reshaped. And in that reshaping, something deeper begins to form. Not love that depends on return, but love that remains regardless. Chapter 21. Presence over precision. The instinct is to get things right, to explain clearly, to correct gently, to guide the moment toward accuracy. But accuracy no longer holds things together the way it once did. You can say the right thing and still lose the moment. You can correct the details and still create distance. Because what matters most has shifted. Not precision, but presence. You begin to see that being correct does not calm them. It does not anchor them. It does not reconnect what is slipping. But being present does. Sitting without needing to fix. Listening without needing to resolve. Responding without needing to correct. These begin to carry more weight than the facts themselves. This is not natural at first. It feels incomplete, like something important is being left undone. Because for most of life, care meant helping someone understand. Now, care often means letting go of that need. You are not there to correct every detail. You are there to remain. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted. Psalm 34:18. Presence does not solve the problem. It does not restore memory or reorder time, but it changes the moment. It brings calm where there would be agitation, connection where there would be confusion. You begin to measure success differently, not by what was fixed, but by what was held together.
not by what was understood, but by what was shared. And slowly, something settles in you. The need to get everything right begins to loosen. And in its place, something steadier grows, the ability to simply be there. In the end, presence carries what precision no longer can. Be still and know that I am God. Psalm 46:10.
Chapter 22. Small Acts, Lasting Meaning. It rarely looks like much. No large moments, no clear progress. Just small acts repeated throughout the day. Answering the same question again. Offering the same reassurance. Sitting through the same confusion. At first, you may try to correct each moment, to bring things back to what is accurate, to fix what is wrong. But you begin to notice something. Correction does not settle them. It unsettles them. They become frustrated, confused, sometimes even agitated, not because they resist truth, but because what you are correcting feels real to them. Correction in this space often wounds. A harsh word stirs up anger. Proverbs 15:1. So you begin to respond differently, not to the facts, but to the feeling beneath them. If they are searching, you offer presence. If they are afraid, you bring calm. If they are confused, you do not argue, you steady the moment. You are not agreeing with what is untrue, you are acknowledging what they are experiencing. Validation does not fix reality. It restores connection. Let your gentleness be evident to all. Philippians 4:5. These moments repeat again and again, and each time you are given the same choice, correct or connect. Over time, you see the difference. Correction leads to tension. Validation leads to peace. Not perfectly, but consistently. This becomes the work, not large actions, but small, steady responses, given daily, given quietly. Faithfulness here is not dramatic. It is repeated. Let us not grow weary of doing good. Galatians 6:9. There may be no recognition, no memory of what you have done, no visible result that carries forward. But it still matters, because what you are creating is not remembered, it is experienced. Calm instead of conflict, steadiness instead of fear, presence instead of confusion. And that is not small. Love in this place is shown in how you respond, again and again. Well done, good and faithful servant. Matthew 25:21. Chapter 23. The Guilt That Follows. It comes quietly, not all at once, but in moments that linger after the day is done. You replay things, what you said, what you didn't say, how you responded. You wonder if you were patient enough, kind enough, present enough. There is always something you could have done differently, and that becomes the weight, because the standard keeps moving. As the situation changes, what is required of you changes with it. What worked yesterday no longer works today, and what you did today may not feel like enough tomorrow. Guilt grows where there are no clear measures. If our heart condemns us, God is greater than our heart. 1 John 3:20. You may feel it after moments of frustration, a tone that was too sharp, a response that came too quickly, even when you know it came from exhaustion. You may feel it in decisions. Am I doing enough? Should I be doing more? Could something have been caught earlier? Those questions do not settle easily, because this path offers very little certainty, and without certainty,
It is easy to assume responsibility for things you do not control. You begin to carry what was never fully yours to carry. Cast your burden on the Lord. Psalm 55:22. Over time, you begin to see something more clearly. You are responding to what is in front of you, with the understanding you have, with the strength you have that day. Not perfectly, but faithfully. And that matters, because this was never meant to be carried without limit. You were never meant to do this without strain. So the question begins to change. Not, did I do everything right? But, was I present with what I was given? And in that shift, something begins to loosen. Not the responsibility, but the weight of trying to carry more than you were given to hold.
Part 8. The Long Goodbye. End Stages and Final Losses. Chapter 24. The Final Stages. The changes become unmistakable, no longer gradual or uncertain, but settled into something that does not reverse. What once came and went now remains. Memory is no longer unreliable, it is largely gone. Words become fewer, harder to form, and eventually absent, and communication shifts from sentences to fragments, and then into silence. You begin to rely on other things, tone, expression, presence, because understanding is no longer built through language. The body begins to follow the same path. Movement slows, coordination weakens, and tasks that once required effort now require full assistance, whether eating, walking, or even sitting upright. What was once independent is now fully dependent. The days of our years are soon gone, and we fly away. Psalm 90:10. Engagement with the world diminishes with less response, less awareness, and less recognition of time, place, or even familiar faces. You may still see moments, a look, a brief response, a flicker of connection, but they are fewer now, and they do not last. And you begin to understand this is not a phase. It is the end of the path, not sudden, but certain. The person is still present, but access is almost gone. Though our outer self is wasting away. 2 Corinthians 4:16. Care becomes constant, not occasional or shared in passing, but continuous. And in that constancy, something settles. Not ease, but clarity. You are no longer trying to understand what is happening. You are now walking with them through what is finishing. What remains is not what they can do, but that they are still yours to love. Love bears all things, endures all things. 1 Corinthians 13:7. Chapter 25. Letting Go in Slow Motion. It does not happen all at once, and there is no single moment where everything changes, but a gradual unfolding that becomes impossible to ignore. You begin to notice what is no longer possible, as things once done without thought now require help, or no longer happen at all. Independence narrows, choices become fewer, and the world grows smaller. You adjust in steps, taking on more while letting go of what they can no longer carry, and with each step, something else quietly shifts. You begin to see where this is going, not in detail, but in direction, and the path, once uncertain, becomes clear. You are not just living through this, you are watching it move toward an end. To everything there is a season. Ecclesiastes 3:1. This awareness brings a different weight, not confusion as before, but a quiet knowing that settles in the background of each day. Moments begin to feel more final,
even when they are not marked that way, and you find yourself holding on to small things, a look, a response, a brief moment of clarity, because you sense they may not come again. You begin to let go before anything has fully ended. Even though I walk through the valley. Psalm 23:4. There is no clear way to do this, no right pace, and no clean line between holding on and releasing. Some days you accept it, and other days you resist it, but both belong to the same path. You continue to care, to respond, to remain present, but something inside you is changing. You are preparing, not by choice, but by awareness. Letting go is not a single act, but something done a little at a time. My grace is sufficient for you. 2 Corinthians 12:9. And in that slow unfolding, you begin to understand that what you are releasing is not love, but the form it once took.
Chapter 26. The Last Moments. There is no single script for the end, no exact pattern that every story follows, but there are signs that begin to gather. Breathing changes, awareness fades, the body slows in ways that do not recover. Time feels different here, slower, quieter. The urgency that marked earlier days begins to lift, and in its place comes a stillness that is hard to describe. Not peaceful in the way we would choose, but not chaotic either. You remain close, watching, waiting. There is little to do now in the way there once was. Care becomes presence, a hand held, a voice spoken softly, a nearness that does not require response. The work of doing gives way to the work of being. Be still and know that I am God. Psalm 46:10. You may speak to them, even if there is no clear response, because something in you knows it still matters. Not for what is said, but for what is shared. There can be moments, small, unexpected, where something seems to return. A slight movement, a change in expression. Not enough to hold, but enough to notice. And then, eventually, even those pass. The breathing slows further. The space between each breath grows longer. And then, it stops. What was held in time is released from it. To be away from the body is to be at home with the Lord. 2 Corinthians 5:8. There is a stillness that follows, different from before, final. The room feels changed, even though nothing in it has moved. You remain for a moment, not because there is something left to do, but because leaving feels too soon. And in that quiet, something settles. Not understanding, but completion. Part 9. What this has been showing us all along. Quiet resolution without forcing conclusions. Chapter 27. What is a person? Dementia presses a question most of us never have to ask, not in theory, but in reality. When memory fades, when personality shifts, when recognition disappears, what is left? We are used to defining a person by what can be seen, what they know, what they remember, how they speak, respond, and relate. But when those begin to fall away, the definition no longer holds. So the question emerges, not academically, but personally. What is a person when the things that once defined them are no longer accessible? You begin to see that much of what we rely on is surface, real, but not ultimate, because even when those things are diminished, something remains, not as clearly,
not as consistently, but undeniably. A person is not reduced to what they can express. Then the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Ecclesiastes 12:7. This realization does not come all at once. It forms slowly, through moments that do not fit the old definition. A response without words, a recognition without memory, a connection that cannot be explained by cognition alone. These moments begin to reshape the question, not what have they lost, but what remains beneath what is lost. You begin to understand that personhood is deeper than function, deeper than memory, deeper than the mind's ability to organize and respond. The essence of a person is not erased when the mind falters. The Lord looks on the heart. 1 Samuel 16:7. This does not remove the loss. It does not minimize what has changed, but it anchors something. It keeps you from equating decline with disappearance, because what you are witnessing is not the end of a person, but the stripping away of what once made them easily known. And in that stripping, something quieter becomes visible. Not loud, not easily defined, but present. And once you see it, you cannot fully return to the simpler definitions you once held.
Chapter 28. What cannot be taken. Much has been lost. Memory, clarity, independence. The things once relied on are no longer stable, and yet something remains. Not everything has been taken. You begin to see it in quiet ways, a response to presence, a calm that settles without explanation, a recognition that does not depend on memory. It is not consistent, not something you can call on at will, but it is there. What is deepest in a person is not easily removed. For you formed my inward parts. Psalm 139:13. This does not deny the loss. It does not pretend things are as they were, but it refuses to say that nothing remains, because something does, not in the way you once knew them, but in a way that still responds, still receives, still, in some measure, connects. The disease can diminish function, but it cannot erase personhood. I have called you by name. You are mine. Isaiah 43:1. You begin to understand that what is essential is not held entirely in the mind, it is deeper than that, and that realization changes how you see them, not as someone disappearing, but as someone harder to reach. And even when the path feels almost gone, you continue to reach, because what cannot be taken is still worth holding on to. 29. The intruder does not have the final word. Dementia takes much. It alters, diminishes, and reshapes what once felt stable. It presses in slowly, then completely, and it can feel at times like it is winning, because what you see is loss, what you experience is decline, what you carry is the weight of it. But what is seen is not all that is true. The story is not contained within what the disease can touch. The intruder is real, but it is not ultimate. The last enemy to be destroyed is death. 1 Corinthians 15:26. Dementia does not create the final ending. It only occupies a part of the story. What it alters is temporary. What it touches is limited. It cannot define what a person ultimately is. It cannot hold what belongs beyond it. What God has made is not undone by what is broken. Behold, I am making all things new. Revelation 21:5. This is not something you see fully now. It is not something you can prove within the moment.
but it is something you begin to sense, that what has been diminished is not gone forever, that what has been hidden is not lost completely, not restored here, but not ended here either. This is not denial. It is not an attempt to soften what is hard. It is a quiet recognition that the disease does not have the authority to finish the story. The end of what we see is not the end of what is. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Revelation 21:4. And so you hold this, not tightly, but steadily, not as an answer to everything, but as something that keeps the darkness from being final, a hint, a promise, that what has been touched by loss will not always remain that way.
Part 10. The Weight Behind the Story. Chapter 30. Did we miss it? The question comes quietly, often after everything is clearer. Not at the beginning, but later, when the path can be seen looking back. You begin to replay things, small moments, subtle changes, things that once felt ordinary, and now they feel different. You start to wonder, was it already there? Could we have seen it sooner, done something earlier, changed what came next? Hindsight creates a clarity that was never available in the moment. The secret things belong to the Lord our God. Deuteronomy 29:29. What once felt isolated now forms a pattern. What once seemed small now feels significant. But that pattern only exists because you are looking backward. At the time, you were living forward, responding to what you knew, working with what you could see. And what you could see was limited. Dementia does not begin when it is noticed. It begins long before it is visible. Years can pass before anything becomes clear. You cannot act on what has not yet been revealed. You do not know what tomorrow will bring. James 4:14. Still, the question lingers, not always logical, but persistent, because it is tied to something deeper, the desire to have protected, prevented, or changed what came. And when that is no longer possible, the mind searches for a place to rest the weight. Often it places it on itself. But over time, something begins to settle. You begin to see more clearly. You were not ignoring what was obvious. You were living within what was known. And those are not the same thing. You did not fail to see. It had not yet been shown. If our heart condemns us, God is greater than our heart. 1 John 3:20. That does not erase the question, but it changes how you carry it. Less as accusation, more as understanding. And in that shift, something quiet begins to take its place. Not certainty, but release. Chapter 31. Are we doing enough? The question comes early, sometimes even before the diagnosis is fully settled. What can we do? What should we be doing? You begin to search. Protocols, diets, treatments, new approaches that promise possibility. Names appear, plans are outlined, steps are suggested, and with them, a sense that something can still be changed. You begin to act, adjusting, adding, trying to stay ahead of what feels like it is moving forward. Action feels like control. The plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance. Proverbs 21:5. But over time, uncertainty remains. Some things help, some do not. Most are unclear, and the question does not leave. Am I doing enough?
It follows decisions. It lingers after appointments. It returns in quiet moments. Because there is no clear measure, no point where you can say, "This is enough." And without that measure, the mind fills the space. Maybe more could be done. Maybe something was missed. Maybe earlier would have made the difference. If I had done more, would this be different? Which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life? Matthew 6:27. This question carries weight, not because it has a clear answer, but because it does not. You are working against something that does not respond in predictable ways. Outcomes are uncertain. Timelines are unclear. And yet, the responsibility feels real. So you continue, learning, adjusting, doing what you can with what you know. But slowly, something begins to shift. You begin to see that effort does not equal outcome, that doing more does not always change what will be. Faithfulness is not the same as control. The heart of man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps. Proverbs 16:9. This does not stop the effort. It reframes it. You act not because you can guarantee results, but because it is right to care. And in time, the question softens, not answered, but carried differently. Less as pressure, more as intention. You are doing what you can, within what is known, within what is possible. And that is not nothing.
Chapter 32. The Burden of Guilt. Guilt does not always come from what is known. Sometimes it comes from what is felt. You begin to carry questions that do not settle. Not just about what was done, but about what this means. Was this something I missed? Something I caused? And for some, the question goes deeper. Is this a form of judgment, a consequence? That thought may not be spoken aloud, but it lingers. Because when suffering has no clear explanation, the heart searches for one. Guilt often fills the space where understanding is absent. If our heart condemns us, God is greater than our heart. 1 John 3:20. You may begin to examine everything, decisions made, choices taken, things left undone, looking for a reason, looking for a cause. But this path does not lead to clarity. It leads to weight, because it places responsibility where there is no clear answer. And over time, that weight can grow, not just emotional, but spiritual. Confusion begins to take shape. If God is good, why this? If He is just, what does this mean? These are not small questions, and they do not come from distance, but from living inside the experience. Suffering does not always come with explanation. The secret things belong to the Lord our God. Deuteronomy 29:29. But there is something that must be said clearly. This is not punishment, not for you, not for them. The presence of disease is not the measure of God's judgment. There is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. There is therefore now no condemnation. Romans 8:1. This does not remove the struggle, but it removes a false weight. Because guilt that is not grounded in truth cannot lead to peace. So you begin, slowly, to release what was never yours to carry. Not all at once, not easily, but intentionally. You stop trying to explain what has not been explained. You stop assigning meaning where none has been given. And in that letting go, something begins to steady. Not answers, but trust.
that what is happening is not outside of God's knowledge and not beyond His care. Even here. Chapter 33. The Cost of Care. There is a cost that becomes unavoidable, not just emotional, not just physical, financial. At first it may seem manageable, small adjustments, occasional expenses, but over time the needs increase. More care, more support, more time, and with that, more cost. What begins as manageable can become overwhelming. Monthly expenses rise into numbers that are hard to sustain: 6,000, 8,000, 10,000, sometimes more. And there is no clear end point. Care is not only constant, it is costly. Which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost? Luke 14:28. Decisions begin to press in. Can we continue at home? Do we need more help? Is a facility necessary? Each option carries weight. Home care brings closeness, but also exhaustion, limitation, and strain that builds over time. Facility care brings support, but also distance, cost, and difficult emotions that do not resolve easily. There is no easy answer, only trade-offs. And every decision feels significant, because it is not just about care, it is about dignity, about safety, about what is sustainable. You are not choosing between good and bad, but between what is possible and what is needed. The prudent sees danger and hides himself. Proverbs 22:3. These decisions are rarely made once. They return, they evolve, they press again as the condition changes, and each time the question is not what is ideal, but what can be carried. There may be guilt attached, questions about whether more could be done, whether something else should be chosen. But over time, something becomes clearer. You are working within limits, financial, physical, emotional, and those limits are real. Faithfulness does not remove limits, it works within them. My grace is sufficient for you. 2 Corinthians 12:9. So you decide, not perfectly, but carefully, and you continue forward, carrying both the cost and the care.
Chapter 34. When the caregiver begins to break. It does not happen all at once. There is no single moment where you say, "This is too much." It builds. Fatigue that does not lift, sleep that is interrupted, days that blur into one another without reset. You continue, because there is no clear place to stop. But the body keeps track, energy fades, patience shortens, small things begin to feel heavier than they should, and still you go on. Endurance without rest begins to take something from you. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Matthew 11:28. This is more than tiredness. It is strain that settles deeper, physical, emotional, mental. The demands do not pause, and over time, neither does the cost. There are studies that show what many already feel, that caregivers themselves are at increased risk. Health declines, stress accumulates, even mortality is affected, not because they are weak, but because the load is continuous. The one who is caring is also being worn down. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. Matthew 26:41. You may begin to notice it, or others may notice it before you do, a slowing, a weariness that does not lift, a sense that you are carrying more than you can sustain. But stepping back feels difficult because the need remains, so you press forward.
even when something in you is asking for relief. This is where something must be seen clearly. You are not separate from the cost. Your strength is not unlimited. Your body is not unaffected. And acknowledging that is not failure. You cannot carry everything without being carried yourself. Bear one another's burdens. Galatians 6:2. This does not solve the tension, but it names it. And in naming it, something begins to shift, not the responsibility, but the awareness that even the caregiver needs care. Chapter 35. What the medical world can and cannot do. Medicine offers much: knowledge, diagnosis, guidance. It can name what is happening, track progression, help manage symptoms. It can bring structure to what feels uncertain, and at times it can bring relief. But it also has limits. There is no clear reversal, no consistent restoration, no path that returns things to what they were. Treatments may slow, they may support, but they do not resolve. Medicine can manage the condition, it cannot end it. It is not in man who walks to direct his steps. Jeremiah 10:23. This creates a tension. You look to the medical world for answers, and it gives what it can, but what it cannot give remains: certainty, outcome, control. You begin to understand that knowledge does not remove the unknown, it simply defines its edges, and those edges remain wide. Appointments continue, adjustments are made, information is updated, but the deeper question, what will this become and when, remains unanswered. You are given direction, but not resolution. For now we see in a mirror dimly. 1 Corinthians 13:12. So you learn to live differently, not waiting for a solution that will fix everything, not expecting certainty where it is not offered, but working within what is known and accepting what is not. This is not giving up, it is seeing clearly that medicine has a role and a boundary, and within that boundary you continue to walk forward.
Chapter 36. The question of faith. At some point, the question comes, not as theory, but as reality. Where is God in this? It may not be spoken at first, but it is felt, because what you are seeing does not fit easily into simple answers. Loss that unfolds slowly, suffering that does not resolve, a person fading in ways that feel difficult to explain. And so the deeper questions rise. Is this punishment? Has something been done to cause this? The mind looks for cause. The heart looks for meaning. Suffering often makes us search for reasons we can hold. Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents? John 9:2. But the answer is not what we expect. It was not this man, not his parents, not a direct punishment. This is not the result of a specific sin. It was not that this man sinned or his parents. John 9:3. That does not remove the question, it redirects it, because now the question is no longer who caused this, but why does this exist at all? Why does the mind break? Why does the body fail? Why does suffering take this form? Scripture does not give a simple answer, but it gives a true one. We live in a world that is not as it was created to be, a world where things decay, where what was whole becomes fractured. Creation itself is affected by brokenness. The whole creation has been groaning together. Romans 8:22. Dementia is not outside of that. It is part of it. This does not make it easy,
but it makes it understandable in a different way. God is not absent. He is not distant from what is happening. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted. Psalm 34:18. Not always explaining, but present. Not always removing suffering, but entering into it. This is not a full answer, but it is enough to stand on, because it tells you that what you are walking through is not outside of His awareness and not beyond His care. And in that, even without full understanding, something steady remains. Chapter 37. A different kind of peace. There is a kind of peace that does not come from understanding, not from answers, not from resolution. It appears in places where those things are absent, in the middle of uncertainty, in the presence of decline, in moments that do not make sense. It is not constant, but it is real. You may see it in small ways, a calm that does not match the situation, a steadiness that remains when everything else is shifting, not explained, but present. Peace is not always the result of clarity. The peace of God which surpasses all understanding. Philippians 4:7. For some, this peace is unfamiliar, because it does not come from solving the problem. It comes from something deeper, a trust that is not dependent on outcomes, a confidence that is not tied to what can be controlled. And even when cognition fades, something of that trust can remain, not in words, not in explanation, but in posture, a quiet settledness, a lack of fear that cannot be easily accounted for. Faith can remain even when memory does not. If we are faithless, He remains faithful. 2 Timothy 2:13. This is not something that is forced, not something that is argued into place. It is something that is observed, a difference that becomes visible over time, not in perfection, but in presence. And it does not deny the difficulty. It exists within it. There is still grief, still strain, still questions that are not answered, but alongside those, something else remains. Not loud, not always visible, but steady. A peace that does not remove the storm, but carries through it. My peace I give to you, not as the world gives. John 14:27. And for those who see it or experience it, it becomes something that does not need to be explained to be known.
Chapter 38. Where this understanding comes from. This work does not come from a single story. It is gathered from organizations that study dementia, from those who treat it, from those who live inside it, caregivers, families, individuals trying to describe what is happening to them. Across forums, discussions, and shared accounts, the same patterns appear, the same questions, the same frustrations, different voices, but a common experience. What is written here is drawn from those voices, not quoted directly, not cited individually, but observed, repeated, recognized across many accounts. This is not one perspective, it is a convergence of many. In an abundance of counselors there is safety. Proverbs 11:14. Medical understanding has shaped parts of this, so has lived experience. Neither alone is complete. Together they form something clearer. For those who want to explore further, the following represent the kinds of sources from which this understanding has been drawn. Alzheimer's and dementia organizations, care resources, research, and education. Memory clinics and neurological research groups. Caregiver forums and discussion communities where experiences are shared openly and honestly.
family caregiver support networks, medical literature and public-facing health guidance, online communities documenting lived experience from both patients and caregivers. These are not presented as formal citations, but as places where the same patterns, the same struggles, and the same questions can be seen again. What is written here can be found echoed in many voices. The sum of your word is truth. Psalm 119, 160. If you have seen your experience here, it is because it has been seen before, not by one, but by many, and now gathered so it can be understood.